That's
The
the
hellish
Heidelberg
torment.
Catechism. Yeah, that it's the
Yeah.
experience of
In the Reformed teaching. I think that's fair enough a way to put it. Feel free to jump in, but that goes back to Scripture now. So what if the early church
so the
believed this?
hellish torments, like
The
that's the
hellish
Heidelberg
torment.
Catechism. Yeah, that it's the
Yeah,
experience of God forsakenness on the cross. Uh, it's a little bit, out of dead, buried, descended. In that interpretation, really, he's experiencing the descent, as it were, kind of before dead and buried, or it's all part of dead and buried. And yeah, so a theological interpretation, which you're saying um, is probably, maybe the early church that, they understood that was an aspect, but that's not really what they meant by saying Christ descended. Fair?
yeah, that's right. I think as a general rule, what they're talking about Christ liberating. He's going to liberate people, that sort of thing. So there's an actual descent of Christ, local or geographical descent. So again, Melito, Justin, but this brings us back to the first question, or the primary question, which is, what does Scripture say? And this is where I've just not been convinced of the scriptural arguments for it. There's been recent work on this, and it's been people are now talking in evangelical circles more about this these days, I think, than they have in the past, in terms of what do we do with the descent in light of the history of interpretation where they believed it happened. But it's interesting. This doesn't solve it, but it's interesting that Justin gives exegetical warrant from a spurious part of Jeremiah. And if you look at things like the sign of Jonah, is the sign of Jonah the descent of Christ? I think in the Bible, the sign of Jonah is the resurrection, because it's a sign to the generation. If you look at Ephesians 4, he descended to the lower parts of the earth. That's a tough one. It could mean something like that, but it could just mean, in Greek we call it apposition, where the lower parts are the earth, where the Greek phrases refer to the same thing. Sometimes it's Romans 10 is used, which is he descended, is also he who ascended, but I don't think it has to mean what the descent clause is taken to mean, if we mean a geographical descent. And so maybe Revelation 1, the keys of death and Hades, but I just don't think there's enough there. Scripture's got to be the norming norm, and I know it's ancient. I know the reformational views are a little bit awkward in light of the early church, but I just haven't seen the scriptural foundation for it. And some of the more contemporary arguments, if you look at, I looked a lot at Amandus Polanis on this, and he has a lot of helpful interaction with views that are still out there today. And I'm more convinced by his line of argument.